The year 1819 in Philadelphia felt less like a city and more like a declaration. It was the unofficial capital of the American mind, a place where cobblestone streets intersected with Enlightenment ideals. The New Athens, a title the city eagerly adopted, was bustling with trade and an almost arrogant belief in its own permanence. The generation that had endured the revolution was ceding control to one that only remembered the triumph. The scars of the war, the desperate compromises, the near bankruptcies, the political betrayals were being deliberately paved over by a narrative of inevitable destiny. But this very hubris, this willful forgetting of the messy, chaotic birth of the nation, created the perfect historical void for a masterpiece of deception. The economy was booming, fueled by Western expansion. The sale of public lands, the vast territories ceded by the states and organized by Congress, was the financial engine of the federal government. Every new settler, every deed filed, every wagon train heading west was a testament to the belief that America owned its land, absolutely and indisputably. It was this very fundamental belief that Aaron Burr planned to shatter. Aaron Burr, the architect of ruin. Burr in 1819 was a ghost of his former self. He had been a hero of the Revolution, Vice President of the United States, and the killer of Alexander Hamilton. He had survived a treason trial for his alleged attempt to carve out a separate empire in the Southwest. Though legally exonerated, politically and socially, he was annihilated. He was a man with a genius-level intellect who saw the mechanisms of power not as sacred trusts, but as levers for personal gain. He saw the history of the United States as a series of thinly veiled transactions, a game of bluff and paper. And he knew where the structural weaknesses lay. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first government, 1781 to 1789, were the weakest point. They were a necessary failure, scrapped for the Constitution, and thus archivally neglected. While the Constitution was treated as Holy Scripture, the Articles were moldering in archives filled with gaps, rushed proceedings, and lost supporting documents. Burr didn't care about governing, he cared about leverage. He wanted wealth and the power that came from holding the threat of ruin over the government that had cast him out. His scheme was not a simple land grab. It was a retroactive political assassination of the founding documents. He needed a proxy, someone invisible, meticulous, and morally vacant enough to execute a task that demanded a mastery of forgery, law, and history. He found him in a man named William Henry Roberts. The man with no face, William Henry Roberts. Roberts was the perfect cipher. He possessed a keen, patient intellect, but lacked the ego that would draw attention. He was a man who failed upward, a failed surveyor who learned the intricate details of land deeds and colonial boundaries, and a failed attorney who understood the power of precedent and the fragility of title. He was working out of a small, cramped office on the third floor of a print shop, a setting Burr deliberately chose. Printers were masters of paper, ink, and type, the very tools Roberts needed to command. Roberts' training under Burr was a horrifying inversion of a history seminar. He wasn't studying the founders to understand their ideals. He was studying them to replicate their vulnerabilities. The paper. He studied the watermarks of British paper mills like J. Watman and Valley Forge, knowing that the paper used in 1775 was different from 1781 and crucially different from 1819. He paid agents in London and Glasgow exorbitant sums to acquire actual blank sheets of 18th-century laid and wove paper from defunct legal archives, paper that was already chemically and physically aged correctly. The ink. This was the most critical step. Roberts knew that iron gall ink was standard. He experimented for months to replicate the exact formula of the Continental Congress's ink, which was often a rushed, improvised mixture due to wartime shortages. He meticulously tracked how the iron salts corroded the paper over time, creating a halo effect that modern inks could not replicate. He perfected the hue of sepia tone, the aged brown color that demonstrated decades of exposure to light and air. This chemical obsession, as the story would reveal, would ultimately be his undoing. The hands. Roberts didn't just trace signatures, he became the signer. He practiced for hours, mimicking the physical act, the slightly shaky hand of Samuel Huntington, President of the Continental Congress, the bold, confident flourish of John Hancock, and the tight, economical script of Charles Thomson, Secretary of the Congress. He learned to modulate the pressure on the quill, recognizing that a man signing a crucial document in a hurry during a war would apply pressure differently than a man signing a personal letter at leisure. A flawless forgery is not a copy of an artifact. It is a perfected lie about a moment in time. Roberts wrote in a cryptic personal note. The black hole in the archives. Roberts' focus was laser-sharp, the gaps in the historical record between 1775 and 1781. During the war, the Continental Congress and its records were constantly moving, fleeing Philadelphia for Baltimore, Lancaster, York, and back again. Minutes were lost, drafts were burned, and crucial diplomatic correspondence was often destroyed to prevent capture by the British. The key vulnerability Roberts exploited was the concept of executive privilege in the early republic. The Congress often dealt with treaties and secret financing through small, powerful committees. The full legislative body, in its haste and distrust, sometimes delegated massive authority to these committees without demanding detailed public records. Roberts focused on the Committee of Secret Correspondence and its need for foreign capital. The claim was plausible. In 1781, desperate for a loan from a powerful European banking consortium, which he claimed was quietly backed by loyalist British money, the Congress had agreed to a secret, contingent liability regarding the Western lands. They mortgaged the future to save the present. The secret clause Roberts drafted was chillingly precise. It was written in the dry, legalistic language of an international treaty, not a political declaration. It stipulated that certain lands were held in trust for the British-aligned entity, and the U.S. could only claim clear title by paying an enormous indemnity, $10 million in gold, a figure impossible for the struggling new nation to meet within 10 years of the final peace treaty. Failure to pay meant automatic reversion of title. This was the bomb. It was historically consistent with their desperation, structurally sound as a legal document, and completely untraceable in the public records. Roberts, the man with no face, had successfully inserted a shadow treaty into the nation's birth certificate.